Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Stepping Up by me, Kindar, the figure writes, and Tiger Supervisor. Today we are doing chapter 49. The two thieves broke into the store from a window in the darker part of the alley. Okay, let's start this. The two thieves broke into the store from a window in the dark part of the alley. A pitiful light from a torch set to torches. Torches set to illuminate the street barely reached. Tibs needed to ask still about the light stone used in his entrance. If those could work without having essence pushed into them, it would make lighting the town easier and make such easy entry into building rarer. The shop was a tailor's. The owner moved in when still was healed and catered to anyone who thought looking important was better than keeping the coins. Nobles were the majority of his customers, but Tibs had seen a handful of runners shop there. Don wasn't one of them. Sorcerer didn't dress the way his behavior said he should. He thought himself better than any runner, but his robe was worn just like the other. He kept it until he found one in the dungeon, and only spent the coins to have it dyed the dark purple that almost matched Corruption's color. Tibs sneaked in through the small window a minute after the thieves. It was too small for them to take anything out, so this was sabotage. So, I don't need this. There were two other tailors in the growing town, but they aimed their wares at the more common folks. They had received business from the nobles, since until this tailor, the nobles' only other option was to travel to another city, and even they found the cost of the transportation platform to be too much. They would have to look into which of them paid Sebastian to do this. There we go. Yeah, I didn't need it. This sits right there. The shop was on two floors. The ground one was divided into the storefront with two wooden forms showing what the tailor was capable of. A smaller room for the tailor to take customer measurements and do fittings, and the storeroom in the back. Tibbs had explored the building when the tailor first moved in, as he did with all the shops. The rolls of fabrics were stacked to the ceiling, and only had enough space for the tailor to move and pull out what he needed. At the back, to his left, since he'd entered from the side, there were the stairs leading up to the living quarters. Tibbs moved silently, listening to the two thieves grumble as they had to squeeze through tighter space caused by the uneven stacking. The tailor was thin, and Tibbs was small. The thieves were neither. He saw the back of one of them. To him, it was as if Clario and Taurus were in the sky, providing enough light to make out shapes and larger details. Grimdor told him it was possible to see more by weaving the essence, but Tibbs hadn't managed that in the last few days. He maneuvered close to without being noticed, had his hand in and out of the pocket without a reaction, then retreated to look at the item he'd taken. He'd aimed for that pocket because the thief had patted it before entering. It was a box, but he couldn't make out more of it. Inside, he felt his essence wriggle about. Whatever was in it was alive. He pocketed the box. Verino wouldn't know what was in it. The thieves were further in when Tibbs returned to them. The one he'd picked the pocket of was cursing softly, patting himself. What? The other thief hissed. Tibbs climbed the wall of fabric to ensure he was out of their way. Can't find the tin she gave me, his victims whispered back. Just wonder how deep of a sleeper the teller was. Did you at least take it before we left? The other asked with derision. I did. I checked I had it before we entered. Then it's probably in here, and it opened on falling through that hole in your pocket. There isn't a hole. Still have mine, so don't worry. Even if you lost it outside, this is still going to happen. Don't we need both tins? I hope not. I released my little buggers, so we can get out of here. Why is this so tight? His victim complained and gave up trying to turn, moving sideways instead. Tibbs had planned to follow them to their hideout, make sure Harry found out about them, but he had to deal with what had been released. He didn't know what something so small. He didn't know what something so small that many of them fit in the box of taken could do to rolls of fabrics, but it wouldn't be. Tibs filed the mention of a she to look into later. He doubted it was the guard's lieutenant he already knew worked for Sebastian. She had to be too busy handling the guard to deal with this. Could either of the two other tailors have arranged this directly? They were both men, but one was married. Every time he'd seen his wife, she was complaining about the town and the people. Once the saboteurs were outside, Tibs lowered himself to the floor. He released light essence in his hand, and the soft glow blinded him before letting him see more of the fabric he stood between. The rolls were in bright colors, and there were more of them than he remembered. It might be enough to dress everyone Tibs had seen in the Mountain Sea marketplace. What a bazaar. He looked around, searching for anything small on the ground that wriggled, but there was nothing. He absorbed the light. He wouldn't need it for how he did the next part, and it was always simpler for him to work with one essence at a time, especially since he was sensing for something specific. The essence in his pocket registered first as he expended his sense. As with anything alive, but without essence, it was faint. Without an element. It was faint. The next thing that registered was the man sleeping in his bed. How didn't he sense what the other saboteurs had released? He pulled his sense back until the tailor would no longer register. It was roughly where they had stood, so it should be close by. Searching for small groups of essence, he felt them, but under the floor. There were far too many of those to be what the thief had released, and what would they do from under the building? As he tried to decide if he could bring in his essence more, he noticed how some groups dispersed, the individual essences nearly vanishing as they were so faint. That had been what had happened. There were many things in the box, and each went in different directions, making it difficult to sense each one. He planned on picking them up and adding them to his box. Now, he didn't think that was possible. He didn't even want to try the only alternative he had. They weren't dungeon creatures, so they deserved. This may have to be adjusted. So they deserved to live, but he couldn't let them. Yeah. The only alternative he had didn't appeal to him. They weren't dungeon creatures, so they deserved to live, but he couldn't let them be used during his town. He'd only done this once on purpose against a whipper, and still had warned him against doing it again. The other time had been a reflex, a fear. He sensed through the rolls until he found the faint essence. It was only a dot that barely registered, but it was his essence. Anything that moved had it, even flowers. He pulled out the essence, and he no longer sensed what had been there. If it was like the whipper, or rattling, it was now dead. He sensed the same area, waiting for a change, for a sign it was regaining the essence. It didn't happen. He sensed another one and observed that essence. It didn't register in his reserve for how faint it was. He did another, then another, and realized he would be at this all night. He didn't know how many that had been released. He extended his senses around him until he sensed the tailor and pulled it back. He didn't want the man to be drowned. He didn't want to use this against a person, ever. He swallowed, ever again. Knowing what he could do, he realized only his small reserve had saved Bardic, that and how dense the man's essence had been. Would a normal person essence register even more than that of the bug he killed? He shuddered and put that out of his mouth. He could sense what was under the ground, and he thought he sensed individual bugs among the rolls of fabric. He pulled on the essence of one of them, and they all winked out. There was nothing left with There was nothing left with his essence. I may have to rework all of this and change this to his element throughout the story at some point. There was nothing left with his essence within his senses. Yeah, that is clunky. I targeted one. He did it in the dungeon. But he'd been touching the whipper. He had no idea how he'd done it when it was a reflex. He stepped among the fabric, and he felt more of his essence in the ground and among the rolls. He didn't want to kill what left in the ground, but he couldn't sacrifice his town for them. He also couldn't spend all the night locating each bug that had been released. He walked through the fabric and absorbed all the essence he found. He needed to add this to his ever-growing list of things to train in, the ability to only affect one thing within this sense at a time. Abyss! Mez exclaimed, knocking his chair over as he stood, backing from the table and against a runner, shoved him back. We're eating! Tibs had opened the box, which turned out to be tin, to show the content to Karina while he waited for Krosef to bring his breakfast. I have to know what these are. The things in the tins were warm, and like everything else that had been in his range as he absorbed the essence in the shop, he was dead. You should have done that in your room, Mez said. Mez sat down and moved away from Tibs until he was pressing against Kundar. Karina looked in the tin and looked at them. I don't know what they are. Jekyll motioned for the tin as he ate and looked into it. Thread eaters. Where did you find this? In the pocket of a pair of thieves who broke into Taylor Mercandy's shop. The fighter raised an eyebrow. I hope the other one didn't have one. A tin of those could eat through a storeroom full of fabrics in a few months. And once they start breeding, burning the place down is the only way to get rid of them. There was a time when I was a kid that an entire artisans district was decimated by these. They didn't stick to the tailor shop. They ate anything that was fabric. I made sure there aren't any left. So, doesn't that mean that if Tibs hadn't stopped it, he said those things would have spread to other shops? Everyone uses fabrics. How about the houses? They don't care whose fabric they eat, Triple said, going back to eating. And thieves were unleashing them? Karina asked in dismay. At someone's order, Tibs replied, a woman. She probably works for Sebastian. He looked at Jackal. The fighter nodded. My father's like the guild leader, or Knuckles, when he controlled most of the guards. He gets people to carry out his orders. And he might not have given this order directly. He has people who handle the smaller stuff. Back home, there are a few thieves' guilds who operated without supervision because they know what to expect. They know what's expected of them and stick to it. Ragnarok's too small for a full one of those, but that woman will have a crew. Jekyll grinned. She might be the one behind all those theft you aren't doing. You think some of the runners work for her? Jekyll looked around grimly. If coins are what they're after, probably. What are you doing? Tibs asked. You need to leave this to Harry and his guards. You mean my father's guard, Jekyll corrected. I'll be surprised if Knuckle has more than two handful of guard loyal to him left. So sure everyone knows they can't lie to him. He won't bother checking. So even if they aren't using whatever my father is making available, he might not realize he's being lied to. And how does that make it our responsibility? Maz looked at them. Only Kumdar looked uninterested in the conversation, but his was now sure it was an expression he had practiced so he could overhear secrets. If Harry can't keep the town safe, who will? Asked. The guild? Maz stated. Abyss, there's only 5 of us. What can we do? Whatever we can, he said. This is our responsibility, Maz repeated. He fixed his gaze on the archer. I won't be a child. His face turned red before he looked away. It's got nothing to do with that. Being a man means knowing what is and isn't your responsibility. We have to train and do the runs. We need to become stronger so we can reach Epsilon and leave this place. Yeah, This was pointing out that Mez is being very reasonable here. I don't. Yeah, this is going to have to be reworked. That's all. I think, Mez, like I said, that you missed the point where Tibs decided he wasn't leaving. He never. Tibs closed his mouth with a smirk under his eyebrow. Your town, Chico said. Your people. You've been calling it that for months now. You wouldn't be fighting so hard if you planned to leave the moment you could. The guild isn't going to let me go, Tibs protested. It doesn't mean you have to stay here, and you know that. The guild is everywhere. They replied. He hadn't thought about staying until now. He had been too busy surviving. Then this team had turned into his family without him realizing it, and now it seemed the same had happened to this town. He thought he was okay with that. It's a good place to stay, Kira said. We get to help shape Craggle Rock. We get to help shape what Craggle Rock becomes. Not a lot of people get to say that, to do that. Let's look at them in disbelief. This place is our cell. Doesn't matter if it's bigger than the room we were held in. It's nothing more than that. There are always limits on what someone is able to do, or on where someone is able to go. What are limits today may be opportunities tomorrow. That doesn't make sense. That's not. As Jekyll said, sit down. You want to know how this is different from a cell? I'm not about to die here like I was back there. The usher dropped into his seat. You might die anytime you go into the dungeon. I'll take might over will anytime. The fighter leaned in his chair. Leaned back. Leaned back. In his chair. Anytime I've walked into a pit, I might have died. That didn't stop me. I love to fight, and the dungeon's giving me fights I've never had anywhere else. He became somber. Back home, the penalty for killing someone is to be tied to a post and beaten by anyone passing until there's no life left. Took a long swallow from his temple. I'm not afraid of dying, but I don't want to stretch it on. In the dungeon, if it happens, it's going to be quick. It's not going to happen, Tiff stated as Maz let out a cry that was a mix of pain and anger and something else that was in place. People at the table looked their way as the archer stood and left. Yeah, the reason I don't want Mez reasonable here is that Mez is being pulled in at least 3 different directions, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. And here he's venting, not venting. He's venting that frustration on the team. So what he's saying should not be overly reasonable. Here's basically where I sort of lay part of why he's like that right now. That sounded like something his girl would say. And he said more than what Maz would. Has someone been spying on the enemy? Kaz asked. What a smile. And how do you understand what she'd say? Jekyll asked. I'm from a big city. Reno answers, looking at Kamdar with defiance. That means a lot of languages. Mrs. Girl speaks her Karen, and I had to learn it growing up. And why would you be required to learn a language from so far away? Kamdar asked. He opened his mouth to tell him to stop, but Kierna's smile stopped him. You said you traveled a lot. Surely you would know why someone would have to learn a language that isn't spoken anywhere near her city. You know what? I just kind of contradicted. Well, not contradicting. So, because here I explain, I hint as to why. You said you traveled a lot. Surely you know why someone would have to learn a language that isn't spoken anywhere near her city. So, Have you been spying on her? Pickle asked. Karina shook her head. She likes to read, so we end up being in the same places a lot. Not all books are written in the same languages, and the magic of the platform that lets us understand each other doesn't extend to reading, so the merchants have many languages in the books they sell. Is she turning mares against the town? Tibs asked. This is a literally word for word repeat and take it out. She has nothing against Craggle Rock other than it isn't her home, their home. They're betrothed, and she's afraid that means that she'll have to stay here if he does. From what I overheard say, her family is trying to get the guild to release him. Tibs looked at where his friend had disappeared into the crowd, and he wants to do right by her. Was that how Mez saw being a man? Was it? He spent most of his time with his girl, but then so did Jackal, and he still made time for the team, the town. But Joseph wasn't expecting Jackal to take him away from the town. The two were happy here. He does, but I think there's more. That comment you made about not being a child sounds like something she said. I get the sense this betrothal? I don't know how to pronounce that word. To her comes with responsibility that conflict with what it means to be a runner or an adventurer. How do we fix it? Tibs asked. Her smile was sad. I don't think this is the kind of problem we can fix. Mez has to be the one to figure out how to make it work, or if he even wants to. Tibs didn't like it. Mez was acting more and more like the other nobles of the town instead of what he, the archer, said nobles should act like. And it seemed to be because of his girl. He'll work it out, Jackal said. Want it or not, he's a runner, so he has to stay here. You're a bad liar, Tibs replied. I like Cumdar. Cumdar's practice at it, his mother said with a smirk. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. Tibs reminded himself he couldn't fix everything at the same time. He wanted to help Mez, but he needed to make sure his town was under control first. Once the thieves and the corrupt guards and saboteur and everything else Sebastian was arranging were dealt with, maybe he could show Mez's girl Craggle Rock was a good place to live in, even if it wasn't the home she came from. He sighed. So, one problem at a time until they were all fixed. And this concludes chapter 49 of Stepping Up. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to read more of the story, now, if you want to know when the next chapter is going to come out, subscribe, hit the bell. If you want to read more of the story, you can do that on Royal Road for free. You can support me on Patreon and read further ahead of the story, as well as everything else I've written. And if you want to watch me do these live, it's on Twitch every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. The other mornings, I write. And the links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.